Hey everybody, welcome to Reading Your Way to Heaven. This is Gabe Gutierrez, and I'm joined as always by Jason JJ Spoolstra. Jason, what's up, man? How's it going, dude?
Good. Hello. Hello during a random podcast, the month and day of which coincides numerically with my expulsion from a uterus.
You picking up what I'm putting down? Good stuff, man. Jason,
Yeah.
I don't have to tell you, but just to clue our audience into it, which maybe I shouldn't. One, J.J. Abrams was the co-creator of a short-lived TV show, very popular though, starring Kerry Russell, called Felicity.
Who could forget?
Who could forget? It ran on the WB. Didn't everybody see that?
Well, I mean, if it wasn't between Green Arrow and The Flash, I don't think anyone saw it. Or was it just called Arrow? I don't remember.
I mean, it was in the 90s, so it was before all that.
If it wasn't after Buffy, I mean, did anybody really watch it?
True.
Or Seventh Heaven.
Oh, I remember that show.
Yeah, although the dad is... we're not going to go there.
Sure.
But
so this was right before he went into being the producer for the show Lost. And then, of course, from there into all kinds of different things.
Sure.
But Felicity had a good run, much like she does here in these 5 chapters.
Yeah. I don't have a whole lot to say about these 5 chapters, to be honest with you, because I feel like it could be really boiled down to very succinctly, but I don't want to give it away too much. But I feel like it could be boiled down, and he kind of goes into details again of other gods, and he just keeps doing the Aquinas, or I guess Aquinas steals it from Augustine, of the point and then the counters, and how would they argue, and then bring it back to counter their counter.
Yeah. One of my nicknames I was pondering for you was Jason Circular Argument Spoolstra, because that's what he does here. And he doesn't make one. He points out how their very existence is a circular argument. It doesn't have logic. It doesn't stand. And I mean, he does touch on a few other things, but not a lot. I think the bulk of his time is spent talking about the goddess virtue and really predominantly Felicity. And just jumping right in here, of course, we're talking about chapter 21 through 25 on book 4 of part 1. That's a mouthful, of the City of God from St. Augustine. And he opens it up. This first chapter, is it this first one in 21? That is, that's it's 22 maybe. That is the long one. Yeah. No, it's 21. 21 is the long one.
Are you sure? Because 23, or I think it's 23. 23
was
yes.
Long. Who could forget 23? That was the long one. Yes. That's really where he dove
but 21
deep into Felicity. 21 was long, and at the end, though, just without getting into all the specifics of the chapter itself, his final point on the subject of the goddess's virtue and felicity, if felicity is the reward of virtue, well, then Felicity is not a goddess, but a gift of God, of the God virtue, right? But if Felicity is a goddess, well, then why should Felicity not be said to confer virtue, since the acquisition of virtue is surely a great felicity, right? Like you've got one goddess here and one goddess there, and the mere existence of each of them kind of nullifies the need for the other.
It's syllogism 101, Gabe. It really is. It's just taking, okay, if you're going to state this as a fact, then it's my cousin Vinny. It doesn't hold water, Yana. I can't do a New York accent. I'm terrible. I apologize.
No, that's okay. I
all
really
those that
enjoyed every
listen.
time you try. Do it again.
No. It doesn't hold water. That was a little better.
Thank you.
You're welcome. But it's also the only other thing that I would say that he mentions here, but he goes much more in depth later on, is he's also tying in Jupiter to all this, because if Jupiter is the king of the gods, then why, and if Felicity is not a goddess but is a flow, it was part of the virtue, but then if virtue is not a god either, if those two kind of null each other out, then that all stems back to Jupiter. But y'all have already kind of cut yourself at the legs going in. He's already kind of setting up the argument.
Oh yeah, no, and he, that next chapter feels out of place, but it's not. And that chapter 22 is where he lays out how is it Varro, who puts together like an encyclopedia of all the gods.
Yes.
The names, what they do, and this is important, because if you didn't know, what good is knowing that a god exists if you don't know what to do, if you don't know who to talk to for whatever needs that you have. And it does feel a little bit out of place, because in the very next chapter, Augustine goes right back into Felicity. That's that famous 23 that we're talking about. That is the longest chapter of the section. But what's so important about including that 22 argument is pointing out the reality that there are so many gods. And I know he's been doing that for a while, but just so much so that there's this encyclopedia of it. And it's not just enough to know them, but to know what they do, and each one serves a purpose. And what he's pointing out here, though, and where he eventually gets to, is the realization, like he just calls it out, that what's happening here is that there are good things that you're receiving, and there's a rightful recognition on behalf of the individual to realize that didn't come from me. I didn't do that. Mm-hmm. Someone out there did this for me. So there's this affirmation of the recognition of something greater than yourself, right? But now to say that joy that I'm experiencing, instead of it being a gift, I'm calling it now a god or a goddess. And they do that with everything. And so much so that there has to be a Wikipedia of gods. An encyclopedia, a book, a compilation, just to even keep track of it. But even then, there's no way, because there's one for almost literally everything, except there's not, because that's just impossible.
And the fact of that Felicity is the new kid on the block, or the new god on the block. And he hammers them hard, because he's like, listen, if we're defining what felicity is, and we see how important, like you said, because everyone universally is coming to the realization that there is something or someone greater than myself that has bestowed upon me this blessing and this happiness and this joy and this grace, then why are you just now thinking of this and placing the name and putting and leveling equal in the goddess factor? But then also, are you saying that you're better than your ancestors? Because if you're saying that this is a new goddess on the block, but you're also saying, but the gods and goddesses are eternal, then why didn't Romulus? I mean, certainly the emperors of the past would have called upon this, but not even just the humans on Earth and in Rome, but even up in the heavens. Wouldn't Jupiter and everyone else
Did they not need felicity? Did they not want joy?
Right. It's like
how are we just now figuring this out? It seems but he goes even further, because he says what are you asking from all these other gods if not felicity?
Mm-hmm.
Like, isn't that why you're doing all these other things so that you can have happiness, so that you can have joy, right? Like, why are we? And, oh, wait a second. This thing that we're asking from every other god is itself a god. Oh, so we should just go straight to that god then, right? But they don't, and he's pointing out how ridiculous that is because
Mm-hmm.
that's all you want. That's all. That's the reason you worship. You know, um, not why anyone worships, but why they worship for sure to get that return, that instant. But even still, like we want joy, we want to be in that love, so it's not totally off base. But then why don't they? Why don't they just go straight there? Because what else? If you were to have felicity, what else do you need? What else do you want?
I love that. I think that summarizes all this perfectly when Augustine says, "Now Felicity is not a goddess because she is, in truth, a gift of God. We should seek the God who can bestow the gift and abandon the pernicious mob of false gods to which the silly mob of fools attach themselves. These fools turn the gifts of God into deities, and by the obstinacy of their insolent self will, offend the God who confers those gifts. How can a man escape unhappiness if he worships felicity as divine and deserts God, the giver of felicity? I love this part right here. Could a man escape starvation by licking the painted picture of a loaf instead of begging real bread from someone who had it to give?
Yes,
Love
yes,
it.
I loved that. I did love that. Oh my gosh.
Uh, we then move on to chapters 24 and 25. 24 is just a paragraph long. But again, it's important. And again, it's kind of setting you up for the next chapter of 25 and 24 arguments adduced. Adduced? Is that how you say that word?
Yeah, that's exactly what I said in my head.
Okay. In defense of the worship of the divine gifts as well as God's. And then chapter 25, only one God is to be worshipped. He is recognized as the giver of felicity, even if his name is unknown.
Yeah, and this is where he gets to kind of what I was leading to earlier in these two chapters, that the realization of, like, let's just call a spade here. Like, this is where your gods came from. You know, like, these things happened and you made gods of them. You know, and in 25, human nature, in its weakness, has already felt that happiness can only be given by God, and that has been realized by men who have been worshiping many gods. And now, because they don't know who gives happiness, they call happiness itself a god, right? Like that thing that we were talking about, that confusion of, like, I know this isn't for me, but it's what is it? Oh, it itself is. It's got to be. It's got to be. We have gods for everything. It itself must be a god. Um, and while that's something, like, to affirm in the sense that yes, it doesn't come from you, it's not enough. It's not enough to think that it's just some god unknown to you. No, it's a gift, and it's a gift from a God that loves you, that you need to seek out and worship, and that's enough. You don't have to have all these other deities. And he's been making this argument with, like, well, if Jupiter is so great, then shouldn't it be, and everybody, like, follows Jupiter, shouldn't it be enough just to worship him then? And he bestows the gift. Like, let's say Jupiter is let's say felicity is at the mercy of Jupiter. Well, then why don't we just go to Jupiter and ask him to send felicity our way? In which case, felicity is not so much a goddess as much as she is a gift from Jupiter, or actually from the true God. Like, you can see, he's really starting to ramp it up now.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm excited for the next 5, just to see kind of where he goes off of this platform that he's been building.
I was thinking this, and I'm kind of thinking this in real time, so not quite sure if this is accurate at all, but I was just trying to see how this parallels with today's world. And and what similarities can we draw from this? And while I would say there's not a lot of different theologies per se, there's still that, I would say, instead of the thousands of different gods, there's the thousands of different pronouns and the thousands of self identification. Because now we don't worship a god, we worship ourselves. And so if we're each of ourselves is a god, then we get to destine how it happens. But it still comes back to that felicity thing and what Augustine's getting here, getting to his point of, right, you guys you're experiencing something that you are trying to grasp and understand. So since you don't have anything to hold on to, you've made yourself the god, and you've put yourself and you created this mythos within yourself, and you're trying to give reason to the unreasonable at the end of the day, and you're realizing that you're trying to control something that is completely out of your control. And once you surrender to that understanding that, yeah, there is something or someone greater than me, well, now I have to come to wrestle with that and come to acknowledge and accept that, and that can be very difficult. But just, I don't know. I was just kind of, like I said, I'm just kind of thinking this in real time. I didn't know if you had any thoughts on that, or if you have any insight.
I did. I was thinking a little bit about, as you were saying that, just truths, right? And maybe they like you were saying, they have a God. We have the truth for everything, right? Like everyone has their own truth, and that's, you're allowed your own truth unless it's trampling on the truth of another, at least another that we've deemed it to be okay as the truth. Like it's this circular argument of like everything can be true, but then if everything's true, then nothing is true, but then that's okay because everything is true. It's weird. But that is kind of what I'm thinking here, because like if everything is God, if everything is a God, then there's no God, right? There's this structure that it's too big to stand up under its own weight, right? And that's what Augustine is pointing out here in the reality of the Romans. Like, this doesn't make sense. It can't stand. And just by looking at it a little bit, you can see it starting to fall apart. I think our society is going in that same route with the idea of truth and pronouns and identification. It's all part of that.
No,
right? It's all part of people's truths, and like, again, Satan is blurring the line of truth. And he did it then with the confusion of proper worship and deities. Like, yeah, there is God. Like, let me just lean into that. Not only is there a God, there's tons of gods. There's a God for everything, right? And then the other pendulum, of course, is like, there's no God, right? Like, no, there's no real truth. Oh, yeah, no, there is truth. Everything is true, This extreme that we're operating in as the pendulum swings from one side to the other. And, our job is just to continue to love and to pray, and then where possible, just, really just hold the mirror up so people can see, like, look, buddy, you have no clothes. That's my go-to.
Well, and also just the going back to the basic Socratic method. I know I mentioned this earlier in this episode, the basics of syllogism, and if we're going to talk about truth, then using ancient techniques to be able, like, it will work, and understanding objective truth, and really, like you said, putting the mirror up in front of that, not accusatory at all, but it's as Augustine is here what he's doing is that we have, I know there's lots of people doing it. We need to continue to do, of just taking their pseudo truth, their pseudo facts, and just say, okay, then let's draw this to its quote unquote logical conclusion. And then we quickly realize, oh, it's not logical at all. It's illogical. I mean, the simple fact, like prime example, like with abortion, it's, I believe that it is always wrong to directly kill innocent human life. Abortion is the direct killing of innocent human life. Thus, abortion is always wrong. It's that simple. And yes, you can bring out the emotive and the feelings, and it's like, well, I believe in this is my truth, like you were saying. But then you start digging and say, okay, but that doesn't negate this understanding of truth and facts. Okay, now let's bring it. If this is your quote unquote truth, then this should be able, I can't talk, but this should be able to be applied to a broader context. And that's what Augustine is doing here. He's saying, okay, let's take this and now let's apply it to a broader. Let's go to the macro, let's go to the micro, and everywhere in between. And if this is true, it will fit.
It'll stand.
It will stand on itself, or it's going to fall under its own weight. And we're seeing it's a house of cards.
I know we typically try and just stay to the text that we're talking about, but just as an example for what we're talking about, to get a little bit more current, I think you see something like the documentary put out by Matt Walsh, What is a Woman, and the success that it's had, and any clip that you've seen from it, and just the effectiveness of it has been exactly what you're talking about. And what Augustine is doing here is holding up that mirror, and just letting the weight of the argument collapse on itself, without lashing out, without negativity, without a lack of charity, but literally just saying, okay, if this is your truth, if this is what you identify as, then what is that thing? Right?
And it goes back to the circular argument.
Circular argument. Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, what is that thing? And we come back down to Augustine. Okay, cool. Can you explain to me that if Felicity is a god or a goddess, then wouldn't she give us everything that we need? Why would I go to the other ones? Well, you don't understand. We have to have the other ones to pray for those other things. Right. So why are you for a good crop? Well, so that we can have, some good plants. Okay. Why do you want the good plants? Well, so we can have foods, so that we can trade. So whatever. Okay. So why do you want that? Well, so that we're not miserable. we can be happy. Felicity. like there's this thread that he's just pulling just ever so slightly, but the whole thing just comes down because of it. And we see that in the example that I gave, and really just, it doesn't take much, but really a confidence in what is true, and what is true is God and Jesus.
I think the last point that I was just thinking of, and I think, and this is good for myself and good for everyone, that wants to stand for truth and the truth and be able to defend it, and everything that you've been saying, I think, is to be very open to listening to the other side and not be so quick and dismissive. Again, it doesn't mean you agree with it at all. Augustine obviously doesn't agree with any of it, but you can tell he knows it. And how are you going to be able to win hearts and minds and convert people from that other side if you don't know the other side?
Yeah.
If you don't know it really well. And so going into this, in today's world, it can be really scary. And the temptation is to just put our heads in the sand or to run and hide from it. And I'm not saying I'm not saying we have to embrace it, but we definitely have to engage it. We definitely have to be, okay, what are they saying? Yeah. What are the words that they're using? So, and help me understand this so I can better ask the right questions, as you were saying, to just pull that string to make it unravel before their very eyes, God willing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the disposition of Augustine is not, though he does seem a little bit snarky at times, I think overall it's not combative. Mm-mm. It's born out of, honestly, genuine care. Like, he cares for their souls. Now, is there a little bit of like, yeah, you're blaming us for all this stuff, and let me prove to you why that's wrong? Yeah, of course there is. But I do believe that it's because he cares for them. Like otherwise, why would there be these moments of affirmation, of recognition, of like, you're kind of on the right track with this. You went off base here at this place. But the idea, the inclination, like in chapter 25 that it talks about, of like, this is something bigger than you. You didn't do this. That's good. You did right there. Like, that is correct, There wouldn't be moments like that if there weren't charity and genuine compassion and care. And that's the other lesson. That's the other nugget to take here is let our interactions with the world still be driven out of love and compassion. Because we want them to be in heaven,
Mm-hmm. It kind of reminds me a little bit of, as we'll talk about on Friday's episode with St. Paul to the Galatians, of he genuinely cares, but he's going to let you have it. It just different ways on how they do that. Here, Augustine is asking questions to pull the string and kind of get his little digs in there. It's like, we're not gonna shy away from it. Like you said, he's a little snarky, a little, smart alecky about it. But hey, you got to have fun with it somewhere. And Paul, he's not pulling back any punches. And these are his fellow Christians. And he's just like, hey guys, peace and Christ's love be with you. What the are y'all doing? Mm-hmm. He lets them have it. So looking forward to that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like you said and pointed out, the thread between the two of these guys is love of God and love of neighbor, mm-hmm. Right? Like, I love God and I want you to love God because I want you to go to heaven. And so because I love you, I want to share truth with you and affirm you in what is true and discourage what is not. Anything else, Jason?
No, sir. That's it for me.
All right, guys, that's going to do it for us this week. We invite you to visit us over on YouTube. Just type in Reading Your Way to Heaven. The channel will come up. You're welcome to listen to the podcast on YouTube, and that you can leave a comment, any thoughts, any prayer requests, or, of course, you're always welcome to go back to our website as well, readingyourwaytoheaven.fireside.fm. We ask that you share the podcast and keep us in your prayers. Please know that you are in ours. And until next week, we'll talk to you later. Love you. Bye.
Love you. Bye.